So what would you recommend to the audience? What are some things that are easy to do that you could do immediately that the three of you have found have had some great impact? Cos?
Immediately, I would say, I think Kris alluded to this on one of the previous questions, like go through your interview process and make sure that you understand how it needs to change or how it's working in an environment where everything is still basically all remote. Two, get an understanding of how much especially if you're leading engineering, how much of what's in your mind about culture and brand actually is something that people know. Is that something that's been well communicated? Is it consistent? Is it structured? Or is it just like random ideas that you've talked to people in one-on-one? So being more explicit about that. And then I would say three, think about things that you can do on an ongoing basis, like monthly or whatnot, around enforcing some of that and be able to amplify that. This is kind of the same thing with like values and all these things that people do. Like it's one thing to just come up with them, but you have to reinforce them, you have to demonstrate, you have to operationalize them. Otherwise, they don't really stick.
Kris, what are some of your secret weapons?
Oh man, there's so much to think about here, and it depends on what stage you're at as a company. But I think like a couple interesting insights I've learned over the years is, one is you have to make sure your interview process is evaluating aptitude in addition to experience. A lot of companies over-index on experience, and then they get people who can only work in a certain way on a certain technology stack. And if you have hard and novel problems, you need people who are just really good problem solvers to begin with. So really looking critically at your interview process and making sure you have a good mix depending on the seniority of the candidate. I think it's also just really important to make sure that your interview panels are set up to actually represent like a good peer group and the diverse kind of company that you want to build. I think it's just something that's really easy to overlook. But if you're interviewing a senior engineer, you want to make sure you have other senior engineers on your panel who can actually give them a sense of what it's like to work there. And then the last thing is, I think it's really important to tailor your interview process to actually show the candidate what it's like to uniquely work at your company. It's a really good opportunity to sell the candidate. So for example, if you can come up with an architecture question that's grounded in some real architecture that your team is working on or has built, and actually walk them through that architecture and then have like a more collaborative discussion around that rather than just some like abstract problem, I think you'll end up not only like, getting a better signal on whether or not that person can work at your company, but also giving that person a better sense of what's unique about working at your company.
Yeah, actually, I'm really glad you brought that up. I want to kind of give an upvote to two things you said. Number one, define what top means. I have found that when companies define their values rather than culture, values will enable lack of bias and ultimately a more diverse pipeline coming in. And then working sessions will give people who may not have that experience in their resume the opportunity to prove it. So if you want to improve diversity in your company, outline your values and then use working sessions, because you will ultimately find just in general, whether it's experience or background or ethnicity, et cetera, you will have a more diverse company for sure. Brad, what other things have you seen, especially as you've been helping some companies that are trying to get up that curve, tactical things that you've seen work?
Yeah, one thing which I think is really crucial is to showcase what's really happening, what's really getting done. So this, like, for example, if a project just shipped, like go write something about what did it take to actually build this thing? Like what was that experience really like? And start getting that as a recurrent piece. One of the, from a while ago, like Etsy started Code as Craft, for example. And like this has become, like for me, a phenomenal place to read to see about how do certain people like approach some of these problems. And so I think that's a really straightforward thing you can do. You can just go look at what did you ship in the last month? What's there that would be great to write about and talk about? What can you share out with the public? So that's one. Second one, it's pretty easy to hire a videographer. At least in the day when we're present, like remote's a little harder, but to talk about like what is the reality of working, what those interactions look like. You can probably do something fun over Zoom about like product manager calls, engineering calls, and all of that. If you don't have faces of the people who are working at your company, get them on your site, right? Like it really does make a difference for people to say, who are the humans? What are the faces of the people that I'll be really working with? That's, I think, a really good one. And a basic one that you could probably start today is just start asking for feedback of what it's like to work at, what it's like to go through the interview process. What it's like, hey, just go out and do a survey of people who are out maybe in market and say, what is your impressions of our company? And just start listening and get a sense of what your brand looks like today, because you probably have one particular perspective of it, but there's a whole nother one that's the lived perspective that's really happening. That's important to get data about.
Mm-hmm. The process by which people enter the company and enter the loop will definitely determine, and exit the loop, determine if they refer people. So you can get a really aggregate effect if you didn't get the job, but they refer someone who may get a job with your team.